The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence of the house, a sharp contrast to the soft glow of Christmas lights that illuminated the living room. I glanced at the clock. Ryan was still an hour away from coming home, his last-minute meeting running over, as usual. I adjusted one of the gold ornaments on the tree, its shimmering surface reflecting my face. Perfectly decorated, perfectly staged. It looked like our lives, flawless on the outside, but hollow beneath the surface. Opening the door, I found Alex standing there, his grin as easy as ever, holding a bottle of wine wrapped in crisp silver paper. "For the man of the hour," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The cold December air followed him briefly before I closed the door behind him. "Cutting it a bit close for a last-minute gift, aren't you?" I asked, folding my arms but allowing a small smile. He shrugged, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. "What can I say? I thrive under pressure. Besides, isn't that your husband's whole brand?" I chuckled, despite myself. Alex had always been like this, sharp, quick with his wit, and just the right amount of charm to make his teasing bearable. As he handed me the wine, his eyes drifted around the room, landing on the Christmas tree. "You really went all out," he said, nodding toward the intricate arrangement of lights and ornaments. "It's like something out of a magazine." I turned to follow his gaze. "Someone has to keep the traditions alive. Ryan's too busy these days to even notice." Alex didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer to the tree, his fingers brushing against a strand of tinsel. "You've always been good at creating moments, Ellis, even if no one else notices." There was something in his tone that made me pause, something unspoken that lingered in the air between us. I busied myself adjusting the garland on the mantel, pretending not to notice the way his eyes lingered on me a moment longer than necessary. The evening blurred into the beginnings of the party. Rayan arrived just as the first guests began trickling in, his tie slightly askew, and an apologetic smile plastered on his face. "Traffic?" he said as he kissed my cheek briefly. "Everything looks incredible, love." I smiled back, but it felt rehearsed, like so many of our interactions lately. As he moved to greet Alex with a hearty handshake and a laugh, I found myself retreating into the role of hostess, ensuring everyone had a drink, that the appetizers were perfectly arranged. The house buzzed with laughter and conversation, but I felt detached, like I was watching it all through a pane of frosted glass. Every now and then, my eyes found Alex across the room. He was talking to one of our mutual friends, his expression animated, but every so often, his gaze would flicker toward me, brief but deliberate. Later, when most of the guests were gathered near the fireplace, I slipped into the kitchen under the guise of refilling the champagne. I had just finished when Alex appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "Taking a breather?" he asked, his voice low enough that it didn't carry to the other room. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak right away. There was something about being alone with him that felt dangerous, like standing too close to a flame. "You always do this," he said, stepping closer. "Do what?" "Disappear into the background. You're the one who made all of this happen, and no one even notices." His words struck a chord, and I hated how transparent I must have looked. "That's not true," I said, but even I didn't believe it. Alex took the bottle from my hands and placed it on the counter, his fingers grazing mine briefly. The touch was so subtle, so fleeting, but it sent a shiver through me. "Sometimes," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "it's okay to want to be seen." The weight of his gaze pinned me in place, and for a moment, the noise of the party felt a million miles away. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Ryan's voice called from the living room. "Ellis, where's that champagne?" The spell broke, and I stepped back, grabbing the bottle and forcing a smile. "Right here," I called back, brushing past Alex as I moved toward the noise of the party. But even as I rejoined the crowd, the feeling of his eyes on me lingered, and for the first time, I wondered what it was I was really craving this Christmas. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the party. I sat at the kitchen island, sipping coffee, while the scent of toasted bread filled the air. Rayan was reading emails on his phone, his tie already in place despite it being Saturday. His efficiency could be admirable if it didn't feel so impersonal. "You did great last night," he said without looking up, his tone casual. "Everyone loved the party. Alex said the tree was a masterpiece." I paused mid-sip, his words stirring something within me. "Did he?" "Mm-hmm. We should have him over more often now that he's back. He's a good guy, even if he does drive me crazy sometimes." Rayan finally glanced up, flashing me a small smile before buttering his toast. "Speaking of plans, I was thinking we could head to the mountains for New Year's. A few days away might do us some good." "That sounds nice," I replied, though my voice lacked enthusiasm. I wanted to mean it, but the idea of spending more time in our practiced, detached rhythm felt exhausting. Ryan's phone buzzed, and just like that, he was pulled back into his world. "I have to head into the office for a quick meeting. Shouldn't be long." He kissed me on the forehead before grabbing his coat. "Don't wait up for me, okay?" The door clicked shut, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The image of Alex leaning against the kitchen doorway last night replayed in my mind, unbidden but insistent. Later that afternoon, needing an escape from the stifling silence of the house, I decided to take a walk downtown. The city was alive with holiday spirit, carolers on the corners, couples laughing over steaming cups of cocoa, children tugging at their parents' hands to see the elaborate store displays. And then I saw him. Alex stood by a coffee cart, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat, looking effortlessly relaxed. For a moment, I considered walking in the other direction, but before I could, he turned and caught my eye. His grin was instantaneous, and I couldn't help but return it. "Well, if it isn't the Queen of Christmas herself," he said as I approached. "Do you ever take a break from being perfect?" I rolled my eyes but smiled. "Says the guy who showed up with a gift 5 minutes before the party started." "Touché." He gestured to the cart. "Coffee?" We found a quiet bench in the park, the air crisp but not unbearably cold. Alex sipped his coffee and watched as a group of children attempted to build a snowman nearby. "You've changed, you know," he said suddenly, his tone more thoughtful than teasing. "How so?" "You're different. More serious, maybe. Like you've forgotten how to have fun." I bristled at his words, but deep down, they hit home. "I don't think that's true," I said, though it came out weaker than I intended. He raised an eyebrow. "Really? When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy?" I didn't have an answer. Instead, I looked down at the coffee cup in my hands, the steam curling into the cold air. "See? Too proper, Ellis. You weren't always like this." There was a softness in his voice that disarmed me, and for a moment, I let myself wonder what he saw when he looked at me. That evening, back at the house, the silence felt heavier than ever. I walked past the tree, its lights twinkling softly, and thought about Alex's words. Too proper, too serious. On impulse, I picked up my phone and sent a quick text. "Still in town? I need help with something." Alex arrived an hour later, still wearing the same coat from earlier. "What's the emergency?" he asked, stepping inside and glancing around. "The garland," I said, pointing to the mantel. "It's uneven." He laughed, a sound that immediately made the room feel warmer. "You called me for this? I'm honored." As we worked together, the conversation flowed easily, each joke or teasing comment drawing us closer. At one point, I turned to hand him another ornament, and our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, but it sent a jolt through me. "Ellis," he said softly, his voice a notch lower than usual. I looked up, and the space between us seemed to shrink without either of us moving. His eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I couldn't look away. Before I could overthink it, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was both brief and electric. When he pulled back, there was no awkwardness, no immediate apology, just silence and the faint sound of the tree lights humming in the background. We shouldn't, I started, but my voice trailed off. I know, he said, his tone steady, but we did. And as he left that night, I was left staring at the tree, my heart racing and my mind spinning with thoughts I couldn't untangle. The days after that night felt like a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't name, much less control. Guilt crept in like the cold that seeps through a cracked window, silent but inescapable. I tried to bury it by throwing myself into our routines, convincing myself that whatever had happened with Alex was just a moment of weakness, nothing more. Why don't we go skating this weekend? I suggested to Rayan one evening as we sat at the dinner table. He barely looked up from his tablet, scrolling through emails. Skating? Yes, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. We used to love it. Remember that time we went to Central Park and you almost fell on that kid? That earned a chuckle from him, but he shook his head. That was years ago, Ellis. I've got too much on my plate right now. Maybe after the holidays. I nodded, masking my disappointment, but inside, something fractured. His response was logical, even reasonable, but it was another reminder of how our relationship had shifted. Once, Ryan would have dropped everything for a chance to spend time together. Now everything else seemed to take precedence. It started innocently enough. Messages exchanged with Alex about the party, then about the tree, then about nothing in particular. Alex, do you always decorate like that, or was it just for the party? Me. I always go all out. You should see it in February, Valentine's Day Massacre. Alex. Now that I have to see. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. Friends text, don't they? But every word carried an unspoken weight. Every joke felt like a step closer to something we shouldn't be. One evening, after another long day of Ryan working late, Alex texted, "Take a walk?" I hesitated, but my fingers moved on their own. Where? The park was quiet, save for the crunch of snow beneath our boots. The lampposts cast warm circles of light on the ground, and the occasional couple strolled by, laughing and holding hands. You seem quieter tonight, Alex said, his voice breaking the stillness. Just tired, I guess. Liar! His tone was teasing, but his eyes searched mine, as if trying to pull the truth from me. I stopped walking, turning to face him. Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like you've built this life, and it's supposed to be everything you wanted, but it's not? His expression softened, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, all the time. There was something so disarming about his honesty. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years, and that scared me. We walked in silence after that, the unspoken words between us louder than any conversation. As we neared the park exit, he turned to me, his gloved hand brushing mine for just a moment. It was nothing, really, but it felt like everything. When Ryan suggested inviting Alex for Christmas dinner, I froze. Alex, I echoed, my voice carefully neutral. Why not? He doesn't have family in the city. It'll be good for him to be around people during the holidays. I wanted to protest, but what reason could I give that wouldn't sound suspicious? So, I nodded, forcing a smile. The evening was a masterclass in tension. The table was perfectly set, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded just so. Ryan sat at the head, effortlessly charming as he regaled Alex with stories from work. I played the part of the gracious hostess, laughing at the right moments, refilling wine glasses, and pretending I didn't feel Alex's eyes on me every time I moved. Ellis outdid herself this year, Ryan said, gesturing to the spread of food. I don't know how she does it. Alex raised his glass in my direction, a small smile playing on his lips. It's impressive. But then, She's always been good at making things look effortless. The compliment was innocent enough on the surface, but the way his voice lingered on the words made my heart race. I avoided his gaze, focusing instead on cutting another piece of turkey. As the evening wore on, the lines between us blurred further. Every accidental touch, every glance that lasted too long, felt like a secret shared in plain sight. By the time Alex left, I was emotionally exhausted, torn between the safety of my life with Rayan and the magnetic pull of something I couldn't quite define. Standing in the doorway after Alex disappeared into the snowy night, I felt the weight of Rayan's hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I nodded, forcing another smile. "Just tired." But deep down, I knew the real reason. I wasn't just tired. I was unraveling. The crisp winter air bit at my cheeks as I laced up my skates, pulling my scarf tighter around my neck. The rink was alive with the sounds of laughter and scraping blades, children weaving clumsily between more experienced skaters. I had come here hoping to lose myself in the motion, to forget for a little while the gnawing confusion inside me. The first glide was awkward, my legs wobbling as I found my rhythm, but soon the familiar flow of skating took over. I circled the rink, my breaths forming small clouds in the air, the noise around me fading into a comforting hum. And then I saw him. Alex was standing at the edge of the rink, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his breath visible in the cold. He caught my eye, his grin widening as he raised a hand in a casual wave. I skated over, my heart beating a little faster. "You're stalking me now?" I teased, though my voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Pure coincidence," he replied, stepping onto the ice. "But if you want to believe I orchestrated this, I won't stop you." We moved together, circling the rink in a tandem that felt effortless, as if we'd been skating side by side for years. The conversation was light at first, snippets of holiday plans, half jokes about our mutual lack of coordination on the ice. But there was an underlying tension, a pull that neither of us acknowledged outright. At one point, Alex stumbled, his arms flailing for balance. I couldn't help but laugh as I reached out to steady him. "I thought you were supposed to be smooth," I said, the corners of my mouth lifting. "Only off the ice," he quipped, but his expression softened as he looked at me. We stopped near the edge of the rink, leaning against the barrier as we caught our breaths. The world around us seemed to blur, the holiday lights reflecting off the ice in soft hues of blue and gold. "Ellis," Alex said, his voice quieter now, the humor gone. I turned to him, my breath hitching at the intensity in his gaze. Before I could think, before I could talk myself out of it, he leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was as undeniable as it was inevitable. It wasn't hurried or stolen like the first one. It was deliberate, full of everything we hadn't said aloud. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of guilt. For a moment, it was just us, suspended in the cold air, the rest of the world forgotten. Afterwards, we sat on a bench just outside the rink, sipping hot chocolate from paper cups. The silence between us was thick, but not uncomfortable. "I can't keep doing this," Alex said finally, breaking the spell. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Pretending. Acting like this is nothing. Like you're nothing." He turned to face me fully, his eyes searching mine. "I can't just be Ryan's friend anymore, Ellis. Not after this. And neither can you." His words hit me like a punch, forcing me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he continued, his voice softer now. "Just be honest with yourself. You deserve that much." I nodded, though my thoughts were spinning. Alex reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face before standing. "I'll see you," he said, his tone full of meaning. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Back at home, I found Ryan in the living room, flipping through a travel magazine. He looked up as I walked in, his face lighting up in a way that felt almost foreign. "Hey, I was just thinking," he said, holding up the magazine. "What if we go to Vermont for New Year's? A little getaway, just us. We can rent a cabin, do the whole snowed-in cozy thing." I forced a smile, nodding as I sat down beside him. "That sounds nice." But as he continued talking about rental options and driving routes, I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the rink, to Alex's words, to the kiss that had changed everything. Ryan reached over, squeezing my hand. "It'll be good for us, Ellis. A fresh start for the new year." "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A fresh start. But even as I said it, I knew the fresh start he envisioned wasn't the one I needed. The cabin bags were half-packed, neatly organized in their usual, methodical way. Sweaters folded into perfect squares, boots wrapped in protective covers. It was the kind of task that usually calmed me, a semblance of control in a life that felt increasingly chaotic. Ryan had stepped out for a moment, leaving me alone to finish the last of the packing. As I zipped up the final bag, I heard the faint rustle of paper. Turning, I saw Rayon standing by the dresser, holding a small silver-wrapped box. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was, the gift Alex had given me after the rink, tucked away and forgotten in the rush of everything. "What's this?" Rayan asked, his voice deceptively calm. "It's just a gift," I replied, my words faltering. "For me?" He opened the box, revealing the small pendant inside. His eyes narrowed as he picked up the card that came with it. I watched in silent horror as he read Alex's handwriting. "For when you want to feel seen." The silence that followed was deafening. Rayan's hand clenched the card tightly, his knuckles whitening. "Alex gave you this?" I swallowed hard, unable to look him in the eye. "Yes." His laugh was short, bitter. "When exactly did this start, Ellis? At the party? Before? How long have you been lying to me?" "It's not what you think," I started, but he cut me off, his voice rising. "Don't insult my intelligence. I knew something was off, but I trusted you. I trusted him." He threw the card onto the bed, pacing the room like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. God, I've been such an idiot. I stood frozen, the words caught in my throat. Finally, I found my voice. "It wasn't planned, Rayan. I didn't mean for it to happen." "That's supposed to make it better?" He turned to face me, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You're my wife, Ellis. Do you even care about what we've built? Or was that just another facade for you to hide behind?" His words hit like a hammer, but instead of retreating, something inside me snapped. "Don't act like this is all my fault," I said, my voice trembling. "I've been trying to tell you for months, years, that something was missing. You just didn't want to hear it." "And Alex is the solution? My best friend?" Ryan's voice cracked on the last word, the anger giving way to pain. "I don't know," I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. "All I know is that I feel alive when I'm with him in a way I haven't felt in years." The confrontation with Alex happened later that evening, when Ryan stormed out of the house and drove straight to his apartment. I followed shortly after, terrified of what might happen. When I arrived, Ryan was already inside, his voice echoing through the hallway. "How long, Alex? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back?" Alex stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about sneaking around, Ryan." "Don't give me that," Ryan snapped. "You've destroyed my marriage, my family. Was that your plan all along?" Alex didn't flinch. "No, it wasn't. But I won't apologize for how I feel about her." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Ryan turned to me, his face a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "You're really going to let him talk like this? To me?" I didn't know what to say. Ryan stormed past me, slamming the door behind him. The silence he left behind felt suffocating. Alex finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I won't force you to do anything, Ellis, but you need to decide what you want. Not for Ryan, not for me, for yourself. That night, I sat alone in my car, the engine off, the cold seeping through the windows. Rayanne's words played on a loop in my head, but so did Alex's. In one hand, I held the small pendant Alex had given me. In the other, my wedding ring. Both weighed heavily, symbols of two lives, pulling me in opposite directions. The truth was, I had been lying to myself for far too long. About my marriage, about what I wanted, about who I was. The question wasn't about loyalty or betrayal anymore. It was about choosing between a life of quiet comfort or one that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. As the first flakes of snow began to fall, I finally made my choice. The house was silent as I stood by the living room window, the faint glow of the Christmas tree casting soft shadows across the walls. The suitcase sat by the door, packed but not yet claimed. Outside, the snow fell in lazy spirals, the world seemingly frozen in time. Rayan was seated on the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. He hadn't said much since I told him I needed to talk. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. I don't know how to say this, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, but I can't keep pretending everything is okay. It's not fair to you, or to me. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. So that's it? You're just giving up? On us? It's not giving up, I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay composed. I've tried, Rayan. I've tried so hard to be the wife you deserve, to make this work. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. You didn't lose yourself, he said sharply. You chose someone else. That's not the same thing. I looked away, the truth of his words stinging like a slap. I didn't choose this to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. But staying in this marriage, knowing how I feel, would be the greater betrayal. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. I gave you everything, Elis. Everything. And now you're telling me it wasn't enough? It wasn't about what you gave me, I said, tears streaming down my face. It was about what we stopped giving each other. We became strangers, Ryan, and I can't live like that anymore. He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping in defeat. So, what now? You run off to him, and I'm just supposed to what? Forget you ever existed? I stepped closer, hesitating before placing a hand on his arm. You'll move on, Ryan. You'll find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. But I can't be that person anymore. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he nodded, his expression a mixture of anger, sadness, and reluctant acceptance. I hope he's worth it. The streets were quiet as I drove to Alex's apartment, the snow muffling the sound of the tires on the pavement. My chest felt tight, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through me. When Alex opened the door, his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. He stepped aside, letting me in without a word. I thought you'd be with him, he said finally, closing the door behind me. I was, I replied, setting my bag down by the couch. But I couldn't stay. He studied me for a long moment, as if searching for something in my face. Then, without a word, he reached out and pulled me into his arms. The clock was nearing midnight as we stood on the balcony of Alex's apartment. The city stretched out before us in a sea of twinkling lights. I leaned against the railing, a sense of calm settling over me for the first time in weeks. I made these earlier, I said, pulling a small tin from my bag. Christmas cookies. It's tradition. Alex opened the tin, pulling out one of the neatly decorated treats. He took a bite, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of surprise and delight. These are amazing. They taste like something my mom used to make. I smiled, the warmth of his reaction filling the spaces that had felt so empty for so long. I'll take that as a compliment. As the final seconds of the year ticked away, Alex handed me a glass of champagne. We clinked glasses as the distant sound of cheers and fireworks filled the air. To new beginnings, he said, his voice low but full of meaning. I looked at him, then out at the city, the possibilities stretching out before me like the snow-covered streets below. To new beginnings, I echoed. As the clock struck midnight, the camera would linger on my face, a mixture of hope and uncertainty, but above all, resolve. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be,